Hello, and welcome to South Highland Public Library's Family Storytime. I'm Miss Camille, and this is Black History Month. Today, we're going to be looking at an athlete in the field of sports. Now, I'm sure when you think of black athletes, certain sports automatically come to mind, and I'm sure horse racing is not one of them. But believe it or not, black jockeys and black trainers dominated horse racing in the late 1800s and into the early turn of the century. Unfortunately, racism reared its ugly head in the form of threats from white jockeys, pressure from the Ku Klux Klan, and government-sanctioned Jim Crow laws. All these factors resulted in pushing these victorious athletes out of their position of prominence until they became obsolete. The book that we'll be reading today is appropriately named The Last Black King of the Kentucky Derby, because there has not been a black jockey to win the Kentucky Derby since this athlete. Written by Crystal Hubbard and illustrated by Robert McGuire. Jimmy Winkfield was a small boy with big dreams. Born in 1882 in Chillsburg, Kentucky, he was the youngest of 17 children. His parents, poor sharecroppers, farmed a parcel of land owned by someone else. On the farm, all the children had to work hard. Although Jimmy was the smallest, he never let his size stop him from doing anything he set his heart to. He would carry the heaviest bucket, climb the tallest tree, chase the fastest chicken. Whether at work or play, Jimmy always gave his all. What Jimmy loved best was riding horses. He was captivated by the big, powerful animals. After rushing through his chores, Jimmy would sit for hours watching the thoroughbreds parade between local horse farms and the racetrack in nearby Lexington. Sometimes he would hop on one of the work horses, riding it bareback, pretending to be a jockey. Atop a horse, Jimmy felt big and powerful too. Horses seemed to love Jimmy right back. When he talked to them and gently stroked their muzzles, the horses bowed their heads as if they were listening. When Jimmy rode, he didn't need to speak at all. The click of his tongue, the twitch of his hands, or pressure from his knees was all it took for the horse to understand what he wanted it to do. Jimmy dreamed of riding horses for the rest of his life and becoming a great jockey, like Isaac Murphy. Ike Murphy was the best of the best. His picture and news of his races were always in the papers. Ike Murphy gave Jimmy hope that his own dream was possible. As a teenager, Jimmy began spending time at the racetrack on weekends. He became so well known by the stable hands that they gave him the nickname Wink. Eventually, Wink was offered a job as an exercise rider and stable hand at a racetrack in Latonia, Kentucky. Part of his pay was room and board. Living at the track, Wink learned even more about horses and began studying the jockeys too. He watched how they handled their horses, the way they talked to them, how they raced them. When Wink saw the jockeys sitting proudly in the winner's circle, dressed in their fine colored silks, he knew he wanted to be there one day himself. In the spring of 1898, Bub May, a horse trainer and son of the mayor of Lexington, hired Wink as an exercise rider for his horses. A few months later, in August, Wink got his first chance to race. May, unable to afford an experienced jockey, asked Wink to ride his horse Jockey Joe at the Hawthorne track outside Chicago. Wink was only 16 years old. He had gone from exercise rider and stable hand to jockey in less than a year. This race could be his big break. Wink grew nervous and excited as the day of the race approached. He had seen Jockey Joe blazing around the track during morning workout, so he knew he had a good, fast horse. Now it was up to Wink to prove he was a skillful jockey. When the barrier was sprung, Wink and Jockey Joe bolted. They fell to the back of the pack, but gradually Jockey Joe fought his way up. By the time they reached the far turn, there were only 5 horses in front of them. Wink pushed Jockey Joe hard, all the while searching. Then he found what he was looking for, an opening to move Jockey Joe to the front of the pack. Wink made his move, but the opening was too small and the other jockeys wouldn't give way. Jockey Joe crashed into another horse, which toppled into another, throwing its jockey over a fence. Wink and Jockey Joe sprinted to the finish line just behind the winning horse. But after causing such an accident, Wink knew this first race could be his last. As punishment, he received a year's suspension from racing. Wink was devastated, but determined not to give up on his dream. He spent the year racing in unofficial events, gaining the experience he needed to become a winning jockey. When his suspension ended, Wink earned his first official win at the Harlem racetrack near Chicago. Confident after this victory, Wink tallied 14 more wins during the 1899 racing season. The next year, Wink broke into horse racing's big leagues. He got his first chance to race in one of the country's most prestigious races, the Kentucky Derby. Wink wanted nothing more than to win the Derby. The race would be a chance for his brothers, sisters, and friends to see him ride in his home state. His parents had died years earlier, but Wink knew they would be watching over him, wishing him a win. Saturday, May 3rd, 1900, was Derby Day in Louisville, Kentucky. People walked for miles around to watch a race that would last little more than 2 minutes. Ablaze in orange and blue silks, Wink rode out onto the track atop his mount, Thrive. Wink had ridden the horse a few times before the race, so he knew Thrive was a strong animal with a cool head. Wink was sure he and Thrive could pull off a victory. Staring into the crowd of spectators, Wink had never felt so alive. He eyed the track. Just 1¼ mile stood between him and a Kentucky Derby win. Time seemed to stand still as the horses were positioned at the starting line. Finally, the signal rang out, and the horses were off. Wink acted fast, pulling Thrive in close to the rail, hoping to make the trip around the track as short as possible. Approaching the first turn, Thrive was fourth. At the 3/4 mark, Wink hunkered down, dug in his heels, and began his charge. Fans screamed wildly, panting through clouds of dirt and the spray of horse sweat. Wink powered Thrive into third. Closing in on the finish line, they began to battle for second place. Neck and neck with the other horse, they crossed the line. Wink and Thrive placed third. It wasn't the win Wink had hoped for, but he took comfort in knowing a third place showing in the Derby put him on the way to becoming a great jockey. Just as Wink's career was taking off, racial conflicts began to emerge in the horse racing world. Black jockeys were offered many of the best mounts, and white jockeys were jealous. Wink became a victim of this jealousy 3 months after racing in his first Derby. During a race at the Harlem racetrack, a white jockey named J. O'Connor purposely crashed Wink and his horse into the rail. The horse ended up with 2 broken ribs, and Wink suffered serious leg injuries. He could have been killed. It took months for Wink to recover, but by April 1901, he was back in top riding form and on his way to his next Kentucky Derby. This time, Wink would ride His Eminence, one of the country's best racehorses. Wink was 19 years old and the only black jockey in the race. This was his second chance at a Derby win, and he was more determined than ever. Confidence surged through Wink as he set astride His Eminence at the starting line. When the signal sounded, Wink responded instantly. His Eminence shot into the lead. Nothing could stop them. By the final turn, they were ahead by 3 lengths. The snorts of His Eminence, the wind whistling past Wink's ears, and the pounding of his own heart drowned out the sounds of the other jockeys driving their horses faster. Pressing on, Wink and His Eminence sailed over the finish line. Wink had won the Kentucky Derby. Wink stood before the audience, proud to be the most recent in a long line of jockeys to have won the Derby. When the winner's garland of roses was placed on His Eminence, tears of happiness filled Wink's eyes. After his Derby triumph, Wink continued to build his reputation as one of America's premier jockeys. He won races throughout Kentucky, Illinois, Tennessee, New York, Louisiana, and Ohio. With 161 wins during the 1901 season, Wink felt more prepared than ever heading into his third Kentucky Derby, slated for May 3rd, 1902. Major Thomas Clay McDowell had asked Wink to ride one of his 2 horses, either Allen Adale or the Rival. Nash Turner, a white jockey, was also riding for McDowell and would get first pick of the 2 horses. Allen Adale had weak legs, and the Rival was in good shape, But Wink had exercised both horses and saw a special spark in Alan Adele. Even with weak legs, the horse was a hard worker that wouldn't quit. Wink devised a plan to make sure Turner picked the rival. For a month before the Derby, Wink slowed Alan Adele in his workouts. He never allowed the horse to run the mile and a quarter faster than the rival. When Derby Day arrived, instead of taking each horse out for a ride himself, Turner chose to stand trackside and just watch the morning workouts. Again, Wink slowed Alan Adele's workout. The rival appeared to be the faster horse, so Turner chose to ride him in the Derby. When the race began, Wink and Alan Adele shot from the starting line. The other jockeys were sure the weak-legged horse would tire after such a quick start. They were right. Approaching the backstretch, Wink felt Alan Adele's knees wobble. Wink clung desperately to the lead. His slight body tensed with the effort it took to keep 1,500 pounds of horse running at top speed. The rival and the other horses were closing in. Reacting quickly, Wink steered Alan Adele to the right, just enough to force the other horses into the deeper sand surrounding the race path. It didn't stop them, but it slowed them enough to keep Alan Adele in the lead entering the home stretch. Sweat stung Wink's eyes. He gritted his teeth and tuned out all the stumping and snorting around him. Leaning forward, he pushed Alan Adele harder. The horse gave him everything it had. Wink and Alan Adele crossed the finish line as the rest of the pack thundered past in a blur of browns, blacks, and rainbow-colored silks. When the dust settled, the crowd quieted. Alan Adele was declared the winner by a nose. Wink had won his second Kentucky Derby in a row, making him the only back-to-back Derby winner since Ike Murphy. Wink was a genuine star by the 1903 racing season. With a streak of 22 victories earlier that year, he was feeling confident when he mounted a horse named Early in the Kentucky Derby on May 2nd. Early was the favorite. With Wink on board, a win seemed like a sure thing. Wink wanted this victory more than any other. No one had ever taken 3 derbies in a row, not even Ike Murphy. When the horses were lined up at the starting tape, Wink was so anxious that he caused a false start. After a second lineup, the horses were off. Wink pushed Early hard, bolting past 3 other horses. Starting so quickly was risky, but it had worked for Wink in the past. Halfway through the race, Wink could almost taste victory. Above the stampeding horses, he heard the roar of thousands of fans cheering him on. Wink urged Early to go faster, but Henry Booker, aboard Judge Himes, caught up in the home stretch. Eye to eye, stride for stride, muscle to muscle, Early and Judge Himes fought for the finish. Then, suddenly, Early's breathing grew harsh and his neck became damp with sweat. Wink's heart sank. He knew his horse had nothing left. Judge Himes crossed the finish line first, less than a length ahead of Early. Instead of cheers, Henry Booker was met with the stunned silence of thousands of spectators who had expected to see Jimmy Winkfield win his 3rd Derby in a row. No one was more disappointed than Wink. He realized that he had made his move too soon. He had thought too much about the victory and not enough about the race. After 1903, economic problems drove many racetracks in the United States out of business. As opportunities began to dry up, jockeys became more competitive, vying for the few available mounts. Racial tensions between jockeys increased. Soon, Wink and other black jockeys were forced out of racing by white jockeys who wanted their mounts, and white horse owners who chose not to use black jockeys. Despite hard times, Wink eventually found work with Jack Keene, a Kentucky man who trained horses in Poland and Russia. Keene asked Wink to ride for Mikhail Lazarev, owner of one of Russia's largest racing stables. In Russia, Wink won the Emperor's Purse, which led to races all over Europe, riding the horses of Russian czars, Polish princes, and German barons. While in Europe, Wink married and had a family. He was happy and glad to be racing again, but part of him always missed the dirt of the tracks back home. Wink made a few attempts to return to the United States, but times had changed too much. Black jockeys, once the kings of horse racing, were no longer welcome at American tracks. Wink's 1902 victory, would be the last Derby win ever by an African American jockey. In 1930, Wink retired from racing and settled his family on a 12-acre horse farm in Maison-Lafitte, France. He spent his later years on the farm doing what he loved best, working with horses. Whenever Wink thought back on his long journey from Chillsburg to Maison-Lafitte, he didn't dwell on the bad times. Wink knew he had been blessed. The small boy from Kentucky had lived a big life. To learn more about Jimmy Winkfield, continue reading. The end. To find the last black king of the Kentucky Derby, visit your local library. That's all for now. Bye-bye. Till next time.